are getting ready to do the ghost walk, and y'all are coming along with us. Yeah. And I think, hopefully you want me to spare in the video. This is where we meet at for the ghost walk. And they also have a Hollywood walk that we're going to do one day, hopefully. And this is just downtown Wilmington. I have another video of the carriage ride. And here is the water. And there's the bridge that my hubby takes every day to go to work at one of our stores.
I don't bite. I'm okay with that.
This is our
I've
guide.
had my shots. I'm good. All of you, thank you for coming out. My name is Kitty. I'm going to be your guide for tonight. Spirit. Let me just set the scene for you guys, where we are, when we are, so you know what's going on. Half a block from the river, the Cape Fear was discovered by the explorer Verrazano in the early 1500s. Within just a few years of that time, there was a European presence along the coast. Took different forms at different times. Sometimes it was colonists, sometimes it was conquistadors. But for hundreds and hundreds of years, there's been a European presence on the coast. By the time we get to 300 years ago, it's the early 1700s, the end of the golden age of pirates. Wilmington at that point was already an internationally known port. We had ships in from all over the world. We had merchants, we had traders, we had slave ships, we had English Navy, we had Spanish raiders on occasion, we had pirates. We had two pirates who were regulars here. Not in the sense of raiding, but in the sense of this was like their backyard, their home territory. They like to hang out here. One of them, I'm sure you've heard of, a man named Blackbeard. The other one was a man named Stede Bonnet. They called him the gentleman pirate. If you're curious about pirates, look him up. He was no gentleman. He was a hot mess. Anyway, these little alleyways right off the river where the ships would come in and tie up. This was Wilmington's original red light district. This is where the party was. All the sailors wanted to be here. This particular alleyway was known as Paradise Alley. Obviously not for the scenic beauty of the spot, but because of what it had to offer. Lots of taverns, just tavern after tavern, maybe a shop to buy some food, maybe a flop house where you can rent a bed for the night that's not a hammock swinging in a ship full of smelly men. This area was crowded, it was dirty. You had people from all over the world, you had different languages being spoken. You had drunks, you had livestock running through. You had no police force at all at that time. Very much wide open, rough and tumble area. Think kind of Pirates of the Caribbean type nasty. That's the kind of vibe we had. The most notorious tavern on the Wilmington waterfront was known as the Blue Post. This is where the original Blue Post Tavern stood. The reason it was the most notorious is because of a woman. A woman named Gallus Meg. Gallus Meg was a nickname. In the early 1700s, the word gallus was a slang term for the gallows, the hangman's gallows. So you've got to know, if you're going to be dealing with a woman whose nickname is Gallows Meg, you are probably going to have your hands full. Back then, everybody was a lot smaller than we are now, just across the board. Tall height for a man, maybe 5'5". Back then, Gallus Meg stood well over 6'1", weighed more than 350 pounds, most of which was muscle, the rest of which was attitude, and maybe some tattoos. She would have looked like a giant to these guys, just this massive woman. I mean, these guys were tough as nails, but they were scrawny little guys. Meg was a big girl. Meg ran the Blue Post. She was the owner, proprietor. She was also the bartender and the bouncer and, unintentionally, the entertainment. Like I say, there's no police force down here. Meg had 3 rules in the Blue Post. As long as you went by her rules, you were fine. First rule, You did not leave the Blue Post if you owed Gallus Meg money. Nobody walked out on a tab. Second rule of the Blue Post, no matter how drunk you were, no matter how intense the argument might be, you never stabbed anyone in the Blue Post. No stabbing. Third rule, nobody messed with Meg's ladies. Of course there were ladies down here. They wanted to spend time with the sailors. And they were traditionally in the upper floors of the buildings. They would lean out, call the sailors up to spend time. Meg's ladies were treated well. And if somebody owed them money, they were paid. As long as you went by her rules, she got along fine. If you were too drunk or too stupid to pay attention to Meg's rules, justice was instant, and it came in the form of Meg herself. She did not need a police force. What would happen is this massive woman would swing herself out from behind the bar in there. In 2 or 3 strides, she would be across the tavern to whoever the poor, drunken, foolish rule breaker was. And what she would do is she would reach out, snag him under the chin, pretend like he was short. Grab him under the chin and lift him bodily into the air. Like I say, these guys weren't big, Meg was. She would then stride out into the alleyway with her prize, and word would spread. Meg's got one! A crowd would come running, people would come running in, ladies would be leaning out the windows. This was the entertainment. They would be picking on the guy and heckling him, mocking him, catcalling, making fun, shouting at him, shouting things like, "Look at you! Look at you now, laddie! Ha! You are kicking and dancing just like it's on the Gallus." Gallus Meg. Human hanging tree. She's got her crowd. She's got this idiot. What she proceeds to do with him in midair is beat him to a bloody pulp. About a minute before this guy is either going to pass out or die, she'd pull his face up right next to hers, like maybe she had some advice for him. No. What Meg would do was and bite the man's ear off. She would then toss the bleeding remains down into the alleyway. The crowd would cheer. They loved this. This was their entertainment. This was their NFL, their World Cup, their WWE. What else did they have? Cockfighting? They loved this. Meg would turn, stride back into the Blue Post, with the ear still in her teeth, to several big ceramic pickling jars. That's how they preserved food back then. She would open up one of the pickling jars, poop, spit her trophy in it, wipe the blood off her chin, and go back to work. This did a couple of things really well. First thing it did, no matter who he was or what he'd done, you know he was never going to do it in Blue Post again. The second thing it did, ears don't grow back. Once Meg had put her mark on a man, carried it until the day he died. And good luck, buddy, if you were a one-eared sailor in Wilmington or neighboring ports, the tavern owners didn't want to see you cross Meg. The ladies certainly didn't want to see you cross Meg. She ran the Blue Post successfully for many, many years. Inevitably, she died the way she lived. She died violently. They found Meg sprawled out here in the alleyway one morning, dead of many, many stab wounds from many different weapons. It was not one person that had taken Meg down. It had taken a gang. And they never found out for sure who was in the gang. But you can bet if you were missing an ear, you were under suspicion. She may have died here 300 years ago, but she's never left the area. The restaurant that's in the front part of this building, Delphina's, the very back part of the restaurant where the restrooms are, the storage area, that bumps over into the footprint of where the original Blue Post Tavern stood. That is where Meg is still seen occasionally to this day. But she is never seen by women. She's only seen by men. More specifically, men who've maybe had one or two over the line, gotten a little tipsy, stumbled back to the restroom, and they then have found themselves confronted with the image of a very large, very angry, very unattractive woman who's coming at them like this. Many strong young men have been known to leave the restaurant at a pretty good clip, squealing like girls. There's some members of staff that don't want to be back in the back part of the restaurant. Now, let me put your mind to rest on one thing. If you should decide at some point to visit Delfina's, lovely restaurant, I guarantee you there are no big ceramic pickling casts anywhere in there. The food is good, clean, professionally prepared. Ladies, you can kick back, relax, have a good time. Nothing's going to happen to you. Meg has got your back. Gentlemen, if you decide to have a couple of drinks, you might want to be careful because you could have an encounter with Gallus Meg. She has been active again this summer, and I understand it's not the most pleasant experience. I will leave to your imaginations what may have happened to that big pickling jar full of her trophies. But let me say this, at that time, very common pub food for snacking on while you're drinking were things like pickled pig's ears, pickled pig's feet, pickled pig's snout. Meg was a practical woman. She may well have recycled. I've always found it a little strange that as busy and crowded as downtown Wilmington is, because we are packed, people are taking up every space, this building is not occupied. This building remains closed up. There are trees growing inside. Nobody wants this space. I find that a little curious. Meg may be still in there, keeping people out. So that is Gallus Meg, our oldest documented spirit at 300 years and counting. Piece of work, that one. For our next two spirits, we're going to go out to the street, down to the corner, and then across. Different from Meg as night is from day. It's a completely different kind of haunting. This is the story of a man named William Ellerbrook. William Ellerbrook lived in Wilmington in the years just after the Civil War, 1860s, 1870s. He was a man who had three great loves in his life. First great love in his life was the river. His dad was a tugboat captain and a river pilot, which if you don't know what that is, it's a really skilled job. The Cape Fear River is well named. It is a scary river. It's a tidal river. The tide comes in and goes out twice a day. So the river level rises and falls, and it changes direction twice a day. If you don't know where the trouble spots are, you might not make it from the Atlantic all the way up to dock in downtown Wilmington. William Ellerbrook grew up on his dad's boat, loved the river, loved the work. By the time he was an adult, he knew the river like the palm of his hand. He had also saved enough money to buy his own tugboat. He then became Captain William Ellerbrook, tugboat captain, river pilot. The second great love in his life was his young wife. They'd been childhood sweethearts, grown up together. When they become adults, fallen in love, gotten married. Should have been the happiest young couple on the planet, had everything going for them. So in love. He is doing so well with the business. She caught a fever and died within the first year of their marriage. Everyone said it just took the heart out of the captain, that he was not the same man afterwards. He started keeping more and more to himself. He stopped seeing his friends. He stopped visiting and hanging out. He was angry all the time, started spending more time on his boat. After a few months, it had gotten so bad, he was spending 24 hours a day on his boat, not even coming ashore, just taking any work to get up and down the river. His best friend was a man named Mr. Rowderbush. This is the Rowderbush building. It was Wilmington's first real big general store. Whatever you needed, grain, naval stores, munitions, fabric, spices, cooking supplies, whatever, like the Walmart of their day. Mr. Rowderbush was increasingly worried about his friend, so I one afternoon and said, "Captain, stop by the store tonight, have some coffee with me. I haven't seen you in ages. I've got something for you." Captain's curious. Okay. Comes by, they're sitting inside later that evening, having coffee, chatting, and Rowdebush just can't hold it back anymore. Finally, he just spits it out. He says, look, we are worried about you. All of your friends are worried about you. We never see you anymore. You're always on the boat. You become this hermit. I hope you don't mind. I've got something for you, and I think it might help. Wait here. Goes out the door here, comes back to the alleyway. A minute later, he walks back in and walks up to the captain and hands him a puppy. A little mud puppy. Just all legs and kisses and snow. And the captain looks down at this little ball, and he was horrified. He said, no, I don't want a dog. I can't have a dog. I got no time for a dog. I've got no place for a dog. I can't have thank you for thinking of me, but no, I can't have a dog. Is it that? They argue back and forth a bit. Finally, Rowdebush gives in. He's like, okay, thought it would help. I tried. Comes to take the puppy back out to the alleyway, and as he's stepping out the door with the puppy, the captain sees him pull a pistol out of his belt. And he knew what was going to happen. And he said, wait a minute. No, you can't shoot that puppy. Look, I can't have a dog, but you can't just shoot a puppy. Rowdebush says, come on. He's a stray. It's going to be a short, hard life on the street. The dog is going to suffer. It's going to be better this way. The captain would not hear of it. Got up, grabbed the puppy, said, no. I'll take the dog. I'll find him another home, but I am not going to let you shoot the puppy. Takes the puppy. Goes back to his rooms that night. First time in a long time. He's just sitting quietly in his rooms, watching the fire burn down in the fireplace. Quiet evening, little puppy curled up, sleeping at his feet, dreaming. And as the captain sat in those quiet rooms and looked down at that little dog, he began to realize that for the first time in ages, he didn't feel lonely. For the first time in so long, those rooms didn't feel as empty as they had felt. And within a day or so, he also realized he was not going to get the dog another home. He liked this little guy, and he was going to keep him around. They became a team. You never saw one without the other. If the captain is walking down to work on the river, the dog is jogging right along with him. The captain's on the boat all day, the dog is on the boat all day with him. This goes on. Gradually, the captain starts getting back more to his old self. He starts staying the shore nights. He starts seeing his friends, visiting, hanging out with people. One day, a few months later, Rowdebush sees the captain, kind of corners him, and says, Captain, what did you name that dog? And the captain just looked blank. He said, well, I just call him Dog, and Rowdebush wasn't going to have it. He's like, come on, man. You got to name the dog. The dog has got to have a name. Name the dog. The captain's on the spot. He looks down, little dog lying there at his feet. He just big dog eyes. He looks down at him and he says, well, I guess I'm going to have to call him Boss, because he's the boss of my heart these days. And that is how Boss became the third great love in Captain Ellerbrook's life. They were never separated. Wherever you saw one, you saw the other. Everybody in town knew them. They were popular. Everybody liked them. One morning, a couple of years later, they're walking down to work on the river for the day, come around the corner. They see the one thing they never wanted to see in the city at that time. They see smoke and flames shooting out of the top of the Rowdebush building. Back then, we had no fire department, not like now. If your building caught on fire, it was up to you, your friends, your neighbors, volunteers, to put the fire out. Otherwise, your stuff's going to burn to the ground, take the building next to that, you could lose a city. A group of people gathered across the streets, and men are running in and out of the buildings, trying to make sure there's nobody in there, because it's a big place. Trying to rescue merchandise, trying to fight the fire. The captain runs down to the group of folks, scoops up Boss, goes to a lady in the crowd, says, here, hold on to Boss. Do not let go of this dog. He's going to try to follow me. And you cannot let him follow me, and don't let him follow me. Goes running in with a group of men. They've been in and out several times. They know now. There's nobody in the building, thank goodness. but they're still trying to fight fire, rescue merchandise. The fire is burning hotter. Finally, the captain is the only one that still wants to go in. He's determined. He says, Rowderbush is my best friend. There has got to be something else in there I can get. Runs in that door by himself. A couple of minutes later, there is a terrible crash. And right after that, the most blood-curdling scream you can imagine. Just stand the hair up on the back of your neck. And when he heard that scream, Boss was out of that woman's arms, in that door like a buck. An army could not have held that dog. That was his captain. He was in there. He was in trouble. He needed it. By golly, Boss was going in. And neither one of them came out of the building. It was a couple of days before the ashes cooled down enough for them to go in, try to find the captain's remains, figure out what had happened to him. They went in, they found him just a few feet from the door. A big support beam had burned through, fallen on him, pinned him to the floor. There is no way that man ever had gotten out of the building. And right in front of him, nose to nose with him, was Boss. And had his hand out like petty pieces. I have a rescue note. This one gets me. They brought out the captain's remains, and they went back in and they brought out Boss's remains as well. And as they were bringing out Boss's remains, they realized that in his jaws he had a little piece of fabric from the captain's cuff. He had been trying to help the captain out of the building, and when he couldn't do that, he did the only thing he could. He laid down and he died with it. They buried the two of them together in the same casket, so that in death as in life, they are never separated. They are together forever for all eternity. They are resting in peace now in Oakdale Cemetery. Beautiful historic cemetery about 14 blocks north of here. Lots of famous graves. Put up a monument. On one side it has the captain's name and his dates and his information. But if you go around the other side of the monument, there is a carving of a dog. And it says simply, faithful unto death. They may have been resting in peace in Oakdale for well over 100 years, but they have never left the area. What folks report is that they see a man dressed in working man type clothes, like a navy blue jacket, striding down towards the river, obviously got a purpose, got business. Little dog jogging along beside him, no collar, no leash. Not unusual in an area like this. What's unusual is that if you blink, they vanish. Some years ago, the Rowderbush family finally sold the building. New owners came in, redid the building, had to rewire the entire building. The electrical crew that was in doing the wiring kept hearing a dog barking inside the building. They looked everywhere. There was no dog. The guy that was the head of the electrical crew got so spooked by the phantom dog that he quit the job. Some dogs, when they get in the area of the doorway here, they just kind of freak out. They'll back up and bristle up and snarl, kind of don't want to be near the door at all. Other dogs will just pull like they have to get into that building. And to this day, they still get reports occasionally from people inside the building that they hear a dog barking and barking. Where's the dog? There is no dog. It's Boss and the cat still here. One of the things the new owners did when they came in, cleaning up, they found a bunch of debris that had gone through the fire, the original Rowderbushes, and instead of just tossing it out, they put it in the window, just as a commemoration. It is not a museum quality display, but just to save the stuff and put it in the window as a remembrance of the original Rowderbush building, what it meant to the city, what it meant to the people in Wilmington. I think that was a really smart thing for them to do. Just to say, this is what we were. This is who we were. Remember us. Remember the time. Remember what we were. Remember what was happening. Yeah. That one gets me every time I go home and my dog gets all kinds of biscuits and turkey foods. Rides looking for his head. Wilmington has its own rider. Ours is older than the original. He was here first. This is his story. It's the story of a man named Llewellyn Markwick. Llewellyn Markwick was here in the years before the American Revolution. We've got to go back 250 years to see this guy. Wilmington in the 1750s and 1760s was already a full-blown official city, the city of Wilmington. We had been for decades. Busy, booming port, very much the kind of place people wanted to come to make a new life for themselves. They wanted to come to make their name, to make their fortune in the world. Llewellyn Markwick decided to come to Wilmington. Llewellyn Markwick was a younger son of a lesser branch of English nobility. Whoa. Complicated way of saying, back in Britain, his family were titled. They were Lord this and such, Earl so-and-so. But he had older brothers, and the law at the time said that the oldest brother inherits everything. So Llewellyn is never going to have the titles. He's never going to have the estates or the lands. He was a very wealthy young man, though. Decided to come to the colonies to make his way in the world. Chose Wilmington. Wilmington was delightful. An attractive young man from an excellent family with lots of money. Oh, yes. The city of Wilmington welcomed him with open arms. Within a relatively short period of time, he had kind of worked his way into all the movings and doings in the city. He got involved in shipping, in sales, merchandising, banking, very much on the fast track to becoming one of the VIPs in town. When people first met Llewellyn, there were two things they'd always comment on. The first thing everybody remarked on was a ring that he wore. It was a one-of-a-kind ring. What he had done is before the family had left the old country, or before he had left the old country, he took part of the family coat of arms, which again, he's never going to have because of the young brothers. But he took part of it and had it made into a ring. The ring took the form of a serpent made out of gold, coiled around his finger. The snake's jaws were open, and in the snake's open jaws was a huge diamond. This thing was a rich man's ring from about a block away. You could not miss it. The other thing everybody commented on about Llewellyn was how much he loved horses. Not like we love horses now. He was one of these guys that's obsessed, like the guys that have the big stables that breed the Kentucky Derby race horses and the show horses. He loved horses like that. He had to have the most beautiful, the most well-trained, finest horse flesh money could buy. He had plenty of money. He was willing to spend it, and a whole string of gorgeous horses. And he kept his horses in a big old stable that stood on the other side of what's now the parking area. There's a great big old barn over there, and grooms, stable hands, stable boys. He would ride 2 or 3 times a day. Not like everybody else rode, because that was really the only way to get around back here. He rode like a gentleman. He rode for pleasure. He rode for sport. He would ride a different horse each time. And his horses were so well trained, he could dismount at the mouth of the alleyway, smack the horse on the rump, and it would just drop right down into the barn, into its own stall to be taken care of. Llewellyn loved to take evening rides. They tried to warn him about this. We may have been the city of Wilmington, big and growing, but we were still the colonies. There was a huge amount of wilderness out there. There were Indians out there in the wilderness. There were wild animals. There were bandits on the road. 3rd Street was still a dirt track. They tried to tell him it is not safe for a man to be out alone on the road after dark. Llewellyn didn't listen. Went out for his evening ride one night. Next morning, his horses back in the barn, like usual. Llewellyn Markwick had vanished into thin air. They sent out search parties, looked everywhere for the guy, because he's an important guy in the city. Never found so much as a tricycle. Until 8 years later, 8 long years later, we had one of our big hurricanes come through. And when you get that kind of rain, it's going to wash downhill to the river. People come out the morning after the storm to check the damage. One guy notices up at the top of the hill, near the intersection, there's a big washout. So he goes over, looks down in it, see how deep it is, how bad it is. Thinks he sees something at the bottom of the washout. So he scrambles down in there and he's brushing away the leaves and mud and dirt. He found something all right, something shiny. You know what it was? A ring. Llewellyn Markwick's one-of-a-kind rich man's ring. And it was still on Llewellyn Markwick's skeletal hand, which was still attached to the rest of Llewellyn Markwick. It had not been a robbery. That ring is the first thing anybody would have taken. He had his wallet, money, personal possessions. It had been a murder. He had been shot once in the back of the head at fairly close range, buried quickly in a shallow grave with nothing taken and nothing ever seen. They had no clue. Talking about a cold case, 8 years later, back then, packed up what was left of Llewellyn, sent him back to the old country, filled in the washout. But something strange started to happen not too long after that. Where the washout had formed, where his body had been found, a sinkhole started to drop out. And they would have to come and fill it and pack it because it's in the middle of the road, and all would be well for a while, and then it would drop out again. And this went on and on. They tried to blame it on the kind of dirt that we had, tried to blame it on the rain, tried to blame it on the hill. People in Wilmington knew when that sinkhole dropped out when Llewellyn's body had been found, that was a sign from Llewellyn Markwick demanding the justice he had never gotten. It was not until the age of the coming of automobiles, when all of our roads got paved, that the sinkhole finally stopped dropping out. It'll still drop down a bit to this day and they'll have to patch it. But not like before. But once everybody's in cars, people start to notice something else. Hoofbeats. They start hearing hoofbeats at night, the sound of a horse running hard as fast as it can from up at the top of the hill, down the road to the mouth of the alleyway, racing down the alleyway here and vanishing. Now when everybody rode horses, nobody thought anything about hoofbeats in the night. But with everybody in cars, people hear this and it's weird. A few years ago, young couple, 2 young boys, taking a nice evening summer walk, dark, quiet night. They're walking up the hill there. They heard the hoofbeats. They look up. To their surprise, coming around the corner at the top of the hill, they see a dark horse with a dark rider. Can't make out features. The guy comes racing down the hill directly towards them. These folks were scared to death. They thought this maniac's going to run them down. At the very last second, that horse wheels, races down this alleyway, and vanishes. They reported it. They weren't from here. They had never heard of Llewellyn Markwick or what happened to him. Didn't stop him very nearly running them down, trying to make it back to the safety of the stables 250 years later. He puts in one other personal appearance up on 3rd Street, busy 3rd Street. People report that a young man who's dressed kind of funny looking, like old-timey looking, will stumble out into the road, into traffic, look obviously in trouble, obviously looking for help. Folks slam on their brakes, get out, go around, help the guy, only to discover there's nobody there. One of our cab drivers this past summer had a woman passenger in the front seat with him, reach over, grab the steering wheel, and try to steer the cab around the man in the road who wasn't there. So take this part of this haunting as a little bit of a warning. If you find yourself on 3rd Street some night after dark, keep your eyes open. Because if a young man stumbles out on the road looking for help, what are you going to do? Are you going to slam on your brakes, probably get into a fender bender, the bad driver behind you will follow you close and go too fast, only to get out, go around, and see there's no air? Are you going to let it be Llewellyn Markwick, and just keep driving and hope to heaven you don't hear that of just having kids. Because I will warn you, we have some very creative local drunks in Wilmington, and in warm weather they will roll out into the road in a heartbeat. So if you're on 3rd after dark, keep at least one hand on the steering wheel and your eyes open, because you might have to make a real quick decision. Is this Llewellyn Markwick, or is it local town? Good luck with that one.
Okay guys, I just want to show you how cool this house is.
That is a mountain block. What those were used for, it dates back to the time of horse and carriage. Houses would have a mountain block out front so that the gentleman could step up on that and just step right onto the horse, and also so that the ladies and gentlemen could step on that and step up into the carriage. So if you see a block like that at the curb, you know it's very, very old, and it dates back to the time of horses and carriages. That is a mounting block. You see those? This one survived, and it goes with a house, but it's leased out now. It's an office and a condo, so it's in private hands, been redone.
It's a urban
We have one other standing slave quarters in town at the Bellamy Mansion. That's the big white Gone with the Wind looking mansion on the by the fountain there at 5th. That's a museum, and they have restored their slave quarters to exactly what they were like when the slaves built them and lived in them. So if you're interested in that side of American history, go to the Bellamy Mansion, because you can get into the slave quarters. You can't get in this one, but it is still standing. And there is activity in there, which I will tell you about in a minute. I'll tell you the story of the house on the side of the house right up here.
The Latimer house.
No, you're not.
We have a video of the Latimer house, and I'll link it below.
This is the Latimer House. It is Wilmington's busiest haunting. It looks like a gorgeous 2-story in-town estate home. It is actually 4 full stories. Up at the top, it looks like there's a row of portholes with wreaths around them. That is another full-sized floor of the house. In these big southern estate homes, the top floor of the house was not for the servants and the help. They lived out back in the slave quarters. The top floor of these big houses was for the children. The children had the run of the top of the house. And in the Latimer house, it is the children that are responsible for a lot of the activity. The house was built in 1852 by a man named Zebulon Latimer as a wedding present for his wife Elizabeth. Nice wedding present. Times have changed. They wanted a big family, traditional, got busy. Within a relatively short period of time, Elizabeth gave Zebulon 9 children. Sad but common back then. If you had a big family, you'd lose some. 5 of those 9 Latimer children never lived to see their 5th birthday. At one point, Mrs. Latimer was giving birth to one child in the master bedroom, second floor flat there. She was giving birth to one child there while his family prepared to bury one of the other children. She never got over it. She didn't go crazy or lose her mind or anything like that, but she remained in mourning until the day she died. She never wore anything but black again. Had a long, normal, healthy life, but always wore black. A woman in black is seen standing, looking out of that second floor master bedroom window. Children's faces are seen looking out of the other windows of the house. The house is a museum now open to the public, and children's voices are heard laughing and playing inside the house, and they have physically brushed past, yes, to the museum, when there are no children in the house. The Latimers, obviously a very wealthy family. One of these families that saved everything, not like hoarders, but in the sense of Well, this is the way great-granddaddy did it, so this is the way it's going to stay. The house is spectacular. It's perfectly preserved. It's like walking into 1850. Furniture, rugs, dishware, artwork, mirrors, everything is in there. Incredibly detailed. The Latimers were rare in that they were big readers. They loved books. They had a big private library. Most folks had one or two books. Latimers had a big private library, read to the kids every night. Kids grew up reading to themselves, reading to each other. This house is unusual in that it is one of the very few where there has been a publicly acknowledged paranormal occurrence while the original family was still in residence. In 1935, the man of the house then was a grandson, Andrew Latimer. And a lady friend of his was driving by on 3rd Street one day and she saw him coming out the front door, so she did the perfectly normal thing in the story. She hugs the door. Hey, behave! Waves, hollers. He hears her, turns, sees her, smiles and waves back, turns back around, locks the door, comes down the steps, walks around the back of the house. Middle of the day, broad daylight, people are around, they see it. Nothing unusual, except when Andrew Latimer walked out the front door, he had been dead and in his grave. Did not stop him smiling in front. The house was essentially given by the family to the city of Wilmington back in the 60s on the condition that Wilmington maintain it in the condition the family always had. It's a living history museum, beautiful place. City came in, obviously took over, wired everything up, all kinds of alarm systems. They lock it down every night at dusk, turn on all the alarms. It did not take the city long at all to figure out just how busy that house is. They would come in the morning, open up the house, turn off the alarms, and find that things had moved overnight. Not just little things like a teaspoon. There's an armchair that goes from one end of the floor to the other end of the floor. There's a sewing basket that's especially busy, that moves around, and has on occasion been seen to hover in midair before coming back. The thing they have found moved most often are books. Valuable antique books from that private library. And when books are missing, they always find them all the way up at the top of the house on the children's floor, stacked neatly on a bed or a nightstand. The Latimer children are still being read to and are still reading to each other. Now the bottom part of the house down here, you might think that's a basement. Not really. It is another full-size floor of the house. It is the ground floor. The ground floor of these big houses is always the coolest. Back at the back of the house there, that is the Latimer family dining room, which sounds crazy until you think about it. When the house was built in 1852, there wasn't electricity. You didn't have AC, you didn't have fans. You had the coolest floor of the house. What you did have were big windows that you could throw open to get the river breeze. There wasn't the planting and screening in front of it that there is now. That is where the Latimer family did their dining for generations. It has a cold spot. But it's the room at the front of the ground floor there that's kind of the dark heart of the haunting. That room was a pantry and a food preparation room. It's now the offices for the staff and volunteers. It has a cold spot as well, but it has something extra. When the house was first opened, a professor was in doing historical research. Needed to ask the guides a question, so I went down to the office, stepped inside the door, got a couple steps in, froze in his tracks. Blood drained through the man's face, he went white as a sheet. Couldn't speak for a minute or two. When he finally would speak, the only thing he managed to squeak out was, "There is death in this room! There's death in this room!" Backed up, scurried back upstairs, would not go back down there again. Some folks report when they first step into that office area, they are completely overwhelmed by the most awful smell of rotting, decay, decomposition, death. Just close your throat, gag you, bring tears to your eyes, but it only lasts a second and then it's gone. And the professor was right. There is death. At the time this house was built, we didn't have the hospital system and doctors that we have now. When you were born at home. We didn't have the funeral system now that we have now. When you died at home. The tradition was that the family would send to a funeral director to order the casket. They would then come a day or two later with a big black hearse and the black horses to take your loved one to the church and the cemetery for the funeral and burial. It was up to the family to care for the dead. It was up to the family to bathe the dead, to dress the dead, to prepare their loved one, to walk through the pearly gates into eternity. And in the Latimer house, every one of those 5 Latimer children that died so young was lovingly laid out, bathed, prepared, dressed on a big cypress food prep table in what is now the office area. Now the icing on the ghost cake that's Latimer is this right here. Decorative iron. See it all over the place. Common feature, big southern properties. At the time the house was built, you couldn't just order it from Cadillac. You had to go to an ironworks, make the specific order with your designer. They would make it to your order, bring it, install it. Nobody should have your pattern. As the Civil War was grinding to its bitter end in 1865, things were not going well for the South. We were losing. Wilmington was the last port in the South to be open. We were the lifeline of the Confederacy. That's what we were called. This is the only place the blockade runners could get in with supplies to supply the entire South. When the Union Army finally took the port of Wilmington, that was it. Nothing else was coming in. Essentially, the war was over at that point. That last winter in 1865, the Confederate Army was so desperate, they were forced to go around to a lot of these big properties and confiscate the decorative ironwork. They had to. They took it and melted it down to make bullets to continue fighting, and cannonballs and mortar. If the Confederate Army took your ironwork, it was not coming back. After the war, Mr. Latimer found himself a beautiful house, come through the war without a scratch. We were occupied, but we weren't burned. Strong, healthy, growing family. He's a house-proud guy. And his beautiful house and his wonderful family are surrounded by this big old tacky patchwork wooden fence. He was not happy about that. He knew one of these guys that gets things. And this guy said, I can get your iron. Latimer said, great, do it. A few days later, the man comes back. There's a whole load of ironwork. Latimer says, put it up. Guy puts it up. At the end of the day, Mr. Latimer looks at it. It doesn't match, but that's okay. It's ironwork, which is more than anybody else in town has. Mr. Latimer pays the man the money he asks. The guy leaves. No questions asked. Mr. Latimer should have asked where the ironwork came from. The ironwork came from Oakdale Cemetery. The man was a grave robber. He was going into Oakdale Cemetery after dark to steal the decorative ironwork fencing from around family plots to bring here and sell to Mr. Latimer. Who's going to complain, right? Even the Confederate Army, as desperate as they were, had been a little hinky about trespassing on sacred ground to rob the dead, not the Scott. There are a couple of beautiful ironwork gates in the back of the property, both of them very fancy. Each one had a nameplate at one point. Neither name was Latimer. So that is the Latimer house. It is our busiest haunting in Wilmington. It's where dead men walk out the front door in broad daylight, smile and wave to their friends and go on about their business. It's where a woman in black is seen standing, looking out of the second floor master bedroom window. Where children's faces are caught looking out of other windows of the house. Where children's voices are heard laughing and playing inside the house when there are no children in there. It's where there's a cold spot in the dining room, where there's a cold spot and a smell of death and decay in what's now the office area. It is is where things move around by themselves at night, not just from here to there, but sometimes up 2 and 3 floors at a time, without setting off any alarms or motion detectors, and the entire thing is surrounded by stolen graveyard fencing. There are a lot of spirits attached to this property, and they're not all glad to be here. The activity in the slave quarters, the man that's had that under lease has reported that he hears an angry male voice shouting at him occasionally, but he can't make out the words, and he'll either be lying in bed or lift it up and slam it back down. So who's lifting it? Whoever's in the slave quarters. It is a beautiful museum. The detailing there is extraordinary. It's like walking into somebody's house in 1852. If you're interested, by all means, check it out. But don't ask them about the ghosts because they can't talk about the ghosts. They're not allowed to talk about the ghosts. They are the Historical Society Living History Museum. That's their image. That's what they are. They're also the Haunted Living History Museum. But they won't admit that. But they know it. And now we'll walk around the front of the house and you can see just what a beautiful place it is. And then we'll head back towards
Sea breeze.
I have no idea. That's a
I
beautiful
always know
shirt.
there's something looking at me because I always feel someone looking at me.
angle. When he got home later and enlarged the photograph and was looking at it, he realized he had captured the silhouettes of 2 children playing in the cycle. So the Latimer children are still very much having a good after all. Just because it is so spectacular. It was originally a private home. It's now a bed and breakfast, which, as I told them, is one of the only ways they've been able to save a lot of these old beauties. Do you remember when we were walking down the alleyway back there for Llewellyn's story, the creepy back wall of that building that went up there? Creepy. This is the front of that same building. This is what it presents to the world. That might tell you a bit more about its history. The official City of Wilmington Chamber of Commerce line on bed and breakfasts and hauntings in Wilmington is that there are no haunted bed and breakfasts in Wilmington. You can come and stay in any of our bed and breakfasts. You won't run into ghosts. None of them are haunted. If you are lucky enough to spend a night or two here, and obviously it's a night, if you're lucky enough to be here for an evening or two, and you happen to run into a little girl, you might want to snap a quick picture and remind yourself that there are no haunted bed and breakfasts in Wilmington. We could never say that this is haunted. We would never dream of even hinting that there might be a haunting or paranormal activity here. But just bear that in mind. And it has also been a location in Sleepy Hollow. It's one they've used a lot. It has been in dozens of TV series and movies. Obviously, it is a beautiful place. So you will see it occasionally from time to time at the movies and on TV. One of the other locations that they use all the time for Sleepy Hollow is the courthouse right down there with the big tall clock tower with the bell tower there. That is Sleepy Hollow Sheriff's Department and Police Department. You see it in almost all of the episodes. They're there all the time. So check your GPS right now. You are not only in Sleepy Hollow in upstate New York, you are also in Stephen King's Chester's Mill, Under the Dome, wherever on earth that may happen to you, and your GPS would probably explain. Done by the same man that did the Lincoln Memorial Museum. charge of all of the English armies trying to hold on to the colonies was a man named Lord Cornwallis. When the British occupied Wilmington during the Revolution, that house is where Lord Cornwallis stayed, and he ran the southern end of the British campaign during the Revolution from that house while the British occupied Wilmington. He also had his soldiers stable their horses in the beautiful one of our very oldest. He had his soldiers keep his horses. Not a good way to get popular. As I say, the house is a museum. It's open to the public. What I want you to notice is down at the bottom part of the house, the stonework part, the ground floor. If you look at it from here, you can see that it looks like it has funny kind of rounded doorways with iron barred gates on them. Looks almost like a jail. That is exactly what that is. That is Wilmington's very first jail on the ground floor. It's older than the house above. The house it and the base after the jail was down. The prisoners were held there, and it's much more like a medieval dungeon than anything we think of as a jail. It has the rounded stone cells, the iron barred gates open to the elements, terrible conditions for the prisoners. On quiet nights, they say you can still hear the men moaning and crying inside those cells. And apparitions are seen wandering here in the side yard. When it was time for their punishment, the men were brought out of the jail cells out here. Where we are is where the original gallows in Wilmington stood, and the whipping post, and the stocks. You were brought out here for punishment. If you were to be executed, you were hanged. And what do you do with a dead criminal? Not a trick question. If nobody claims them, you plant them. You get them in the ground as fast as you can. The first convenient area to do that. I mean, you don't want to mess with them alive, you don't want to mess with them dead. Human remains have been found in this area. It's not all that unusual when people are digging down in the historic district, whether it's for water work or gas or electric, whatever. It's not that unusual to run into human remains. They've been found under the courthouse. They've been found under firehouses. They have been found in backyards, under parking lots, in the middle of Front Street. When they redid Front Street completely some years ago, they found human remains and a length of 200-year-old wooden sewer pipe carved from a single log. They had no idea who put it there. If you think about it, in hundreds and hundreds of years of European occupation of this area, not to mention the thousands of years of Native American occupation before that, there's been a lot of death. We have had waves of yellow fever that have swept through this area. Yellow fever is a deadly illness. It's a mosquito-borne illness, not unlike Ebola. One wave of yellow fever came through in the middle of the Civil War. At that point, Wilmington was the biggest, most important city in North Carolina. Yellow fever hit. Within just a few weeks, more than 1/3 of the entire population was wiped out. People died, so many, so fast, they had to dig mass graves to take care of the bodies. There's one of these mass graves in Oakdale Cemetery, Yellow Fever Hill. Big plot with just one obelisk, monument to the yellow fever victims, 1862. There was an earlier wave that came through before the Revolution. Again, they had to dig a mass grave. That mass grave was just outside of the St. James Graveyard, which is 1 block north of Wilmington. That is our oldest cemetery. The human remains from that mass burial were found to extend out under the road. We have survived many, many things in this city. We have survived plagues, we have survived wars, we have survived raiders and insurrections, we have survived smugglers and prohibition and pirates and the Klan and everything. In all of those hundreds of years, there have been a lot of graves that have lost their markers. There have been a lot of graves that never were marked to begin with, like Llewellyn's. So as you walk around Wilmington, enjoy the city. We've got a great city. by all means, get out, explore, but watch your step. Not just because of crazy pavement or insane drivers who will try to kill you, or even our trying to find cockroaches, which come out after dark. But do watch your step, because you never know whose grave you might be walking on. So step gently, shoulder respect. And that's the official end of the Ghost Walk for tonight. I am not going to leave you abandoned in some alleyway in downtown Wilmington. I've got the little